Officer Mason's boots sank into the damp forest floor, each step heavier than the last. Fog clung to the pines like whispered secrets, and the low growl of the river echoed through the night. Titan, his K-9 partner, had been relentless for hours, dragging Mason through tangled underbrush and broken trails, sniffing for a presence that seemed to vanish every time they closed in. Mason wiped sweat from his brow, convinced the trail had ended, until Titan's ears pricked, muscles tensed, and he bolted toward the riverbank. There, the dog froze, staring into the dark water with an intensity that made Mason's chest tighten. Something waited. The forest pressed close, oppressive and damp. Mason's flashlight cut narrow beams through the fog, illuminating droplets clinging to pine needles and the twisted roots that clawed at his boots. Titan padded ahead, ears forward, nose twitching. The dog's movements were precise, unnerving in their focus. Mason had tracked suspect before, but tonight felt different. There was a weight to the air, a sort of quiet that seemed wrong. The usual forest sounds, the rustle of squirrels, the distant crowing of a night bird, had vanished. Even the wind was still. "Easy, boy," Mason whispered, tugging slightly on the leash, but Titan ignored him. His amber eyes were fixed on something Mason couldn't see. Titan's growl was low, a vibration that ran to the officer's legs and into his chest. Mason's heart skipped. They had been chasing this trail for hours, following clues that were half-truths, half-accidents. A missing camper, a cabin left in disarray, a note soaked and illegible in the rain. Mason had thought the trail dead, thought he could finally catch his breath. But Titan's sudden sprint reminded him that the forest had other plans. Branches snapped under Titan's paws as he darted through a tangle of ferns and over fallen logs. Mason followed, cursing under his breath, ankle deep in mud, lungs burning. He remembered the first time he met Titan as a rookie. So full of energy, almost reckless, but brilliant at reading what Mason could not. And now, the dog was leading him somewhere that felt both inevitable and terrifying. The riverbank emerged from the fog like a silent predator. The water's surface reflected nothing but darkness, broken only by the faint ripple of a current moving with eerie smoothness. Titan stopped at the edge, his body rigid, nose pointing toward the water, his growl sharpened, low in warning. Mason crouched beside him, flashlight tracing the bank. There was nothing visible, no footprints, no shape, nothing that suggested a person had been here. Yet Titan's behavior left no doubt. Something was in the water, or had been. Mason swallowed hard. "All right, boy, what is it?" His voice was steadier than he felt. He scanned the bank with practiced caution. The fog was thick enough to hide a small boat or a body. He could hear his own pulse, a drum in the quiet night, as he edged closer. Then he saw it. A glint, half submerged in mud and leaves, reflecting the beam of his flashlight. Mason crouched, stomach nodding. A small, tarnished locket floated near the bank, its chain tangled in reeds. He picked it up with gloved hands. Inside was a photograph. 2 young women laughing, their smiles frozen in a moment that felt impossibly long ago. Mason's throat tightened. This was hers, he murmured. Titan whimpered softly, nudging Mason's arm, and the officer felt a chill run down his spine. The dog's unease was contagious. But there was something more, a certainty in Titan's gaze that made Mason glance back at the river, half expecting movement. Nothing stirred, yet Mason felt eyes on him from the shadows of the opposite bank. Footsteps crunched behind them. Mason spun, flashlight catching the glint of metal in the trees. A man emerged, tall, wiry, wearing a worn jacket plastered with mud and leaves. His face was obscured in shadow, but his eyes, sharp, calculating, were unmistakable. Mason raised his weapon, careful not to startle Titan. "You shouldn't be here," the man said, voice rough, low. "This isn't your fight." Mason's jaw tightened. "I've been tracking this trail for hours. You have no idea what's at stake." The man laughed, short and bitter, eyes flicking to Titan. "I know exactly what you're afraid of." Mason's grip on his weapon didn't waver. There was something familiar about the man's manner, something almost brotherly in the tilt of his head. But Mason couldn't place it. The fog made it impossible to judge his distance, impossible to predict what he would do next. "Step away from the river," Mason ordered. The man smirked. "And miss my chance to finish what should have ended long ago?" His eyes darkened, and Mason saw a flash of pain, resentment, betrayal buried beneath the layers of coldness. Titan growled, a deep, resonant sound that vibrated through the officer's chest. The man froze. Mason noticed a subtle shift in his stance. He had expected the dog to attack, but Titan wasn't moving. The dog's focus remained on the river. Mason followed Titan's gaze and understood, finally, why the man had hesitated. The water churned unnaturally, something moving beneath the surface. A faint splash, then silence. Mason's pulse jumped. The man cursed, tugging a knife from his jacket, and Mason's training kicked in. "Back away now," he shouted. The man hesitated again, and in that pause, Titan bolted. Not toward the man, but along the riverbank, alert, unrelenting. Mason chased after him, breath burning, heart pounding. The river's edge twisted and narrowed, and the fog seemed thicker here, clinging to Mason's skin like ice. Titan stopped abruptly, bristling. Mason skidded to a halt, slipping in the mud. He saw it then, something pale, tangled in reeds, just beneath the waterline. Mason's stomach turned. He swallowed, forcing himself to breathe. He had expected bodies before, seen crime scenes that shook him, but this was different. The water whispered secrets, silent and accusing. The man's voice cut through the fog, sharp and urgent. "Leave it alone, Mason." "I can't." Mason shouted back, "Tell me who she is." The man's smirk faltered, replaced by a look of raw fear. Some things you can't fix," he said, voice cracking. "You'll only make it worse." Mason didn't answer. He reached down into the shallow water, hands trembling. The current tugged at him, cold seeping into his bones. Titan stayed at the edge, ears forward, growling softly. Mason lifted the object from the water, a bloody journal, pages soaked, ink smeared beyond legibility. He glanced at the cover. A name he hadn't expected. The man moved closer, knife glinting, but Titan's low growl kept him at bay. Mason's mind raced. Every instinct screamed to retreat, but he couldn't. Not now. Not when the trail had led this far. The forest around them seemed to hold its breath, waiting. Mason's chest tightened, Titan's fur bristled, and the man's eyes darkened with a mix of anger and desperation. A twig snapped behind Mason, subtle but unmistakable. He spun. Another figure emerged, this one female, soaked, wild-eyed, and shaking. Recognition struck Mason with a force that left him momentarily frozen. "Officer Mason," she whispered. Her voice trembled with fear and relief. "You shouldn't have come." Titan barked once, sharp warning. The first man cursed again, stepping back, knife raised offensively. The woman raised her hands, trembling, and Mason realized she wasn't just a witness. She was a key, a piece of the puzzle he hadn't yet understood. The fog thickened, river murmuring secrets only the night could hold. Mason's flashlight flickered, casting dancing shadows across the faces of the three people now standing at the riverbank. Every instinct screamed danger, betrayal, and the dark truth lurking just below the surface. And for the first time, Mason understood, the trail was never over. The fog clung to Mason like a second skin, thick and suffocating, as he lowered the journal from his hands. Titan remained at the river's edge, ears forward, muscles taut, a silent sentinel against the creeping unknown. The woman's eyes, wide, terrified, flicked between Mason and the first man, whose knife now trembled in his grasp. The river whispered, carrying secrets in its blackened current, its subtle motion promising more than Mason wanted to confront. "You're alive," Mason said, his voice tight, trembling against disbelief. "I thought—" "You weren't supposed to find me," she interrupted, cutting off his thought, voice low, shaking. "If he sees me with you, we're both dead." Mason studied her face. Smudges of dirt streaked her cheeks. Her dark hair plastered her forehead with moisture. Her small frame suggested vulnerability, yet her eyes held a hardened, wary intelligence that made Mason pause. Titan growled low, a warning rumble, but the woman didn't flinch. Her focus was sharper than fear alone. The first man cursed under his breath, tightening his grip on the knife. "Step back, Mason," he said, voice rough, "or you'll regret it." "Who are you to tell me that?" Mason snapped, adrenaline sharpening his tone. "I've tracked this trail through mud and blood, and now I'm not leaving until I know what's happening." The man's eyes narrowed, a flash of anger and desperation mingled with regret. Mason noticed for the first time the faint tremor in his hands, the way his boots sank into the mud unevenly. He wasn't just a threat. He was broken, and that made him dangerous. The woman took a careful step forward, hands raised slightly. "Mason, he's not the only one hiding something," she said. Her gaze flicked to the river. "There's more here than you realize." Mason's pulse quickened. "More?" he asked, instinctively reaching for his flashlight. Titan pressed closer to his side, nose twitching. Mason scanned the riverbank. Half-submerged reeds, mud slick and treacherous, shadows dancing with every flicker of light. Something or someone was beneath the surface, and Mason could feel it, a deep, instinctive knowledge that churned like fire in his chest. The first man's voice cracked. "She's telling the truth. You don't know what you're dealing with. This isn't just about the camper or the cabin or the locket." He swallowed hard, eyes darting between Mason and the river. It's all connected. And if it comes out, we'll all be ruined." Mason's hand tightened around the journal. He didn't understand what all connected meant yet, but the weight of the moment pressed down like the fog itself. Every instinct screamed that this was bigger than a missing person, bigger than any case he had handled. The woman took another step forward. "His name is Corbin," she said, nodding toward the first man. "And he's not telling you everything. He's involved, but not in the way you think. There's someone else, someone controlling him, someone who made him do things he can't even admit to himself." Mason frowned. "Someone else?" "Yes," she said. Her eyes flicked to the river again. "And if you want to survive this, you have to trust me. For now." Mason's mind raced. He wanted answers, but he also had a duty to protect the trail, the evidence, and Titan. The K9 whined softly, nudging his leg. Mason looked down, meeting Titan's amber gaze. The dog had always been able to sense the truth in situations like this, and his current tension was undeniable. Corbin, he guessed that was the first man's name, took a slow, deliberate step back, keeping his knife angled defensively. "You don't know what you're getting into, Mason. If you touch that water, you'll unleash a chain of events that can't be stopped." Mason's gaze shifted to the river. The current shimmered like molten metal under the moonlight, hiding things that didn't want to be found. He clenched the journal tighter, aware of every sound. The soft splash of water against reeds, Titan's tense stance, the fog swallowing their breaths. "Then tell me everything," Mason said quietly, his voice firm, pulling the tension into a knife-edge moment. "Now." The woman exhaled sharply. "The camper, the cabin, the locket. All of it is part of a pattern, a series of disappearances going back years. Corbin, he was forced to help, but he never wanted to. Not really. And if you think this is about just one person, you're wrong. The real danger is still out there, waiting." Mason processed this, heart pounding. The trail had never ended. Not really. And it was bigger, older, and far more dangerous than he could have imagined. Titan suddenly barked, sharp and insistent. Mason turned, his flashlight catching the glint of movement in the water. A hand, pale, clawed at the reeds before disappearing again. His stomach dropped. The river wasn't empty. Someone or something was down there, trapped, struggling. Corbin cursed again, dropping his knife into the mud. "I told you not to touch the water," he yelled, panic overtaking his composure. "You don't know what you're dealing with." Mason's voice cut through the tension. "Then show me. Now." The woman moved closer to the river, careful but decisive. She plunged her hand into the shallow edge, fingers grazing something solid beneath the water. Mason watched, breath held, as she pulled up a soggy backpack, torn and smeared with mud and blood. Inside, documents, photographs, and a faded map fell open. Mason's eyes scanned the items quickly. Names, dates, locations, lines connecting the disappearances over decades. Corbin's face paled. That shouldn't be out here. No one can see that." Mason's mind raced. This was proof, but it was only a fragment. The river seemed to hum with secrets, and Titan's low growl underscored the tension. Mason realized with a jolt that they weren't alone. Something or someone was watching from upstream. The woman's eyes met Mason's. "We need to move," she said urgently. "If he knows we found this, he'll come, and he won't wait." Mason glanced at Corbin. The man's shoulders slumped, his fight deflating into resignation. Go, he muttered. I'll cover you, but don't look back. Don't trust anyone else out here. Mason hesitated. Trust had been a luxury long gone in this case. Yet he had no choice. The river, the fog, the documents, they were all pieces of a puzzle that demanded action. Titan nudged his leg again, and Mason felt the familiar surge of courage that came from the bond with his K9. They moved carefully along the bank, the woman leading, Mason close behind, Titan between them, and the shadowed forest. Every step carried a weight, every rustle of leaves a potential threat. Mason couldn't shake the feeling that the river had already decided their fates, and that whatever lurked in the fog had been waiting for them all along. Suddenly, a splash erupted upstream, followed by a dark silhouette moving with unnatural speed. Mason spun, weapon raised, heart hammering. Titan lunged, growling, as the figure darted between the trees. The woman grabbed Mason's arm, yanking him down just in time. The figure disappeared into the mist, leaving behind only the echo of movement and a lingering sense of dread. Mason exhaled, trying to steady his shaking hands. The woman whispered, "That's him, the one controlling everything. And he's closer than you think." Mason's gaze met Titan's, and he knew without words. The dog had sensed it too. Danger wasn't just nearby, it was imminent, and there was no turning back. Corbin's warning echoed in Mason's mind. You'll unleash a chain of events that can't be stopped. He realized with cold certainty that the river had already pulled them in, and now the darkness beneath the surface, the hidden truths, and the shadowed figures waiting in the fog would force him to confront not just the criminals, but the fractures within himself, his own fear, guilt, and moral compromises. The forest held its breath as the trio pressed onward, unaware that every choice they made was being watched, measured, and anticipated. And somewhere upstream, in the black folds of the river and fog, the first thread of betrayal had already begun to unravel. Mason clenched a journal, tightened close, and pressed forward, knowing that whatever awaited them would test every instinct, every moral boundary, and the fragile trust between the three of them. The real hunt had begun. The fog had grown thicker, nearly suffocating, wrapping the forest and riverbank in a silent, heavy shroud. Mason's boots sank into the mud with each step, Titan moving just ahead like a shadow, senses razor sharp. The woman led them along a narrow trail that curved around fallen logs and jagged roots, her pace urgent but measured. Mason's mind raced. He clutched the waterlogged journal close, aware that every word inside could change everything he thought he knew. Corbin trailed a few paces behind, quiet now, almost invisible. Mason studied him in the dim light, every tense movement, every glance over his shoulder. The man was fragile in ways Mason had not anticipated. Fear clung to him like a second skin, but beneath it was a deep, dangerous knowledge. Mason understood that Corbin wasn't just a pawn. He was a living link to the darkness they were chasing. The river murmured alongside them, an ominous lullaby that hinted at secrets too heavy to bear. Mason felt Titan stiffen. The dog's nose quivered, ears flat, growl rumbling deep in his chest. Mason followed Titan's gaze. Upstream, shadows moved. Quick, fluid, deliberate. Something or someone was tracking them, circling, waiting for the moment to strike. "Stay close," Mason whispered, voice tight. "He's watching." The woman shook her head. "Not him. Someone else. The one who has been orchestrating everything. The disappearances, the lies, the manipulations, he's here. And he's not human in the way you expect." Her words made Mason's pulse race. I can't explain everything yet, but you'll see soon enough." Mason pressed forward, his instincts screaming danger, but his resolve unwavering. He had followed trails before, faced killers, uncovered truths that shattered lives. But this was different. This was personal, and the river had become a silent witness to the horrors hidden in the small town's past. The trail ended abruptly at a clearing where the river widened, forming a shallow pool before bending sharply into dense reeds. Mason's flashlight flickered across a scene that stole his breath. The water's edge was littered with personal effects, mementos of victims long forgotten. A scarf, a child's toy, photographs warped and water-stained. Titan growled, the sound echoing through the fog. Mason felt a sick pull in his stomach. "You see now," the woman said softly, "why I couldn't tell anyone. Why Corbin couldn't either. This is where it all connects. Mason's gaze shifted to Corbin. The man's face was pale, eyes haunted. I never wanted it, he said, voice breaking. I tried to stop him. I tried to save them. But his words faltered. He looked at the river like it had betrayed him personally. Titan barked, suddenly, sharply, breaking the tense quiet. Mason spun, weapon raised, and saw a figure stepping out from the reeds. Tall, unnervingly still, cloaked in darkness. The figure's face was obscured, but Mason recognized the stance, the deliberate, cruel precision. The orchestrator of this terror, the one behind every disappearance, was here. You've come far, Officer Mason, the figure said, voice smooth, almost eerily calm. But you shouldn't have followed the trail. It was never meant to be finished. Mason's heart raced. Who are you? He demanded. The figure smiled faintly, tilting their head. Someone who knows the cost of secrets. Someone who knows what people are willing to do to protect themselves. A pause. Including you. Mason's grip tightened on his weapon. The woman stepped slightly forward, her voice firm. Don't listen to them. This isn't about morality or justice anymore. It's about survival. The figure laughed softly, a sound without warmth. Ah, but morality is always a cost. Look at Corbin here. Did he tell you the truth? Or just what he wanted you to believe? Mason's mind reeled. The pieces shifted, twisted. Corbin's fear, the warnings, the partial truths, they all suggested someone pulling the strings, someone capable of controlling minds and bending events. The river reflected their silhouettes, stretching long and distorted, as if mocking them. Enough games, Mason said, stepping forward, Titan growling at his side. Show yourself. End this. The figure moved then, stepping into the pale light. Mason froze. It was a face he knew. Someone he had trusted. Someone who had been close. Someone who had taught him to believe in justice. Betrayal slashed through him like ice. You, he whispered, disbelief in his tone. Yes, the figure said softly. It was me. Every disappearance, every lie. Every corner of this town I touched, I orchestrated it. But it was necessary. You see, I've been protecting something far greater than any single life. Mason's fists clenched. Greater than lives? How could you? Stop, the woman interjected. You think you understand, but you don't. If we confront them without strategy, we die. Titan senses it. The danger is immediate. This is more than a fight. This is a test of who can survive the river's truth. Mason swallowed hard. He looked at Corbin, who avoided his gaze, ashamed and helpless. The river, the fog, the shadows, it all felt alive, waiting for them to make a mistake. Suddenly, the figure lunged faster than Mason expected. Titan reacted instantly, leaping and sinking teeth into the cloaked intruder's arm. The figure twisted, snarling, and Mason fired. The shot echoed off the fog and trees, sharp and final. The figure fell, but Mason's eyes widened in horror. The face, the betrayal, was not the one he expected. The orchestrator was gone, but the truth remained. Corbin had been a reluctant pawn. The woman had been a survivor, and Mason was left holding fragments of a story that could never be fully told. The river, still and dark now, reflected the aftermath. Titan barked softly, nudging Mason's leg. Mason knelt, running fingers to the Mud Street Journal. The names, the locations, the evidence, they were all here, but at a cost he could feel deep in his chest. Is it over? Mason asked quietly, voice barely above a whisper. The woman shook her head. It's never really over. The river keeps its secrets, and sometimes we carry them forward. Her gaze softened. But you did what you could. That counts for something. Mason looked down at Titan, whose amber eyes reflected the dim light. The K-9's loyalty, focus, and courage had guided him through the nightmare. Mason realized that despite the betrayals, despite the loss, they had survived, and in that survival lay a quiet victory. Corbin stood at a distance, finally lowering his head. He didn't speak, but Mason understood his remorse. Not every story had closure. Not every wrong could be righted. But there were choices, and some could be made. The fog began to lift ever so slightly, revealing the river in calmer, reflective silence. Mason exhaled, the tension leaving his body in slow, shivering waves. He allowed himself to feel the weight of exhaustion, fear, and grief, but also the faintest glimmer of hope. He reached into his jacket and ran his hand over Titan's fur, murmuring softly, "We made it, boy. We made it through the river's truth." The woman moved closer. "Now, we take what we've learned and live. That's all any of us can do." Mason nodded. The journal, the river, the betrayals, they would haunt him, yes. But in the quiet aftermath, he recognized a deeper lesson. Survival, loyalty, and courage were often found in the smallest, quietest moments. Titan's steady presence, the woman's resilience, even Corbin's reluctant honesty. They were threads of humanity in the darkness. And as the river murmured its secrets one last time, Mason felt the lingering ache of loss, but also the fragile, enduring pulse of hope. The night remained silent. The fog lifted slowly, revealing a world scarred, but still alive. Mason, Titan, and the woman walked along the riverbank, carrying the weight of truth, the burden of survival, and the quiet knowledge that even in betrayal, some bonds endure. The trail had not ended at the river. It had only revealed the truth. And Mason knew that some secrets, some betrayals, and some loyalties will remain with him forever.